Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Dara here with another Options and Play video update. Hope everybody's having a great week. We are really setting up for an interesting night slash morning tomorrow, right? Been volatile all week, and now we have this looming tariff deadline. And if options are an indication, we should expect a really big move tomorrow. Some um, sharply elevated option spiders, Qs, VIX. So definitely setting up for a busy finish to the week. Uh, what I want to talk about today is, it certainly involves Disney, but it's kind of a lesson just in general. Okay, I'm going to use Disney just because it's the most recent example of something like this, but it actually popped up on two other occasions just off the top of my head that I can remember this quarter. And what that is basically knowing the catalyst. Okay, so you're going to find this in plenty of other instances. So not it's not just these three that I'll mention. There's going to be plenty of other instances when you'll see this like kind of come into play. And what I mean by knowing the catalyst is knowing why the stock is moving, right? So, um, Disney, right? Disney had this gigantic move over the last month, right? And anybody who's really been paying attention to Disney or really the market in general, because this has been one of the more closely watched names, one of the names talked about the most, has been the biggest catalyst for Disney has been the launch of the streaming service, right? That's why the stock broke out of this 3 4 year pennant, which I've highlighted before. Right, and like this really nice pennant. So you had the breakout, and really what everybody's interested in, and what's really been driving the stock has been the launch of the streaming service, right? So coming into this week, you had earnings, and because the stock had been, such like a Momo runner, the volatility has really expanded. Then the options, right? The option prices get bid up a little bit, right? Because it's been a big mover, been in some wide ranges. The average daily move is expanding on Disney, so the options are going to reflect that going into earnings. And the problem with that is that earnings really aren't the story for Disney right now, right? So this is kind of what I'm trying to get to here. So earnings weren't the story. People are more focused, maybe even like only focused on the streaming service. Yes, they had a blockbuster movie launch, right? And there's other things going well, but the reason why it had this huge move and the reason why everybody's talking about it over the past month isn't because of earnings, it's because of the streaming launch. So with really no material update expected on the earnings yesterday about the streaming launch, and it's kind of at this point, it's kind of like a waiting game, right? It seemed more likely than not that this report wouldn't be as big of a catalyst as the options were anticipating, right? So that's kind of the point I'm trying to drive home. So it's knowing what's moving the stock, right? And to kind of compare it to other names, Boeing, all right. So Boeing just had they just had their earnings. It was so the Boeing just had their earnings, right? And again, so this was on the 24th here, 24th. So they had their earnings on the 24th, and you can see it basically did just about nothing, right? Right here, this is the day. It was up a little bit. So anybody that's been following the news, right, they know that Boeing got hit very, very hard in March off of the 737 Max problems, right? So coming into this quarter, options were pricing in a pretty big move, but the issue with Boeing was that it what was driving the stock price wasn't earnings and revenues. What was driving the stock price was 737 Max update, right? And the company had already given some preliminary production numbers, right? And the only way that it probably would have had a really big move was if there was some sort of update on the planes. And with the company basically giving updates routinely, it just seemed like the options were priced too high for the potential, right? So I don't remember exactly what they were. I think they were around $20. But it basically, the news that is driving Boeing is all about the 737 Max and not really earnings and revenues at this point. So laying out the money for an earnings and revenue story when it wasn't the main driver just seemed like a lot. And another one, UNH. All right, so UNH got absolutely run over in April, not because of their earnings and revenue story, right? I mean, it was because of Medicare for all. People were starting to worry that this could gain some traction, and the political rhetoric was ramping up, right? So when UNH dropped from 250 down to 225 before their earnings, it wasn't because people were worried they were going to miss. It was because people were worried about Medicare for all, right? So going into the quarter, it was kind of tough to lay out the money because the options were elevated, right? Because the stock had just had a really big move. The ranges were wide. The daily range was starting to expand, right? So the options were more expensive because the stock had been in kind of a free fall going into earnings. The problem again, same thing with Disney, same thing with Boeing, is that earnings and revenues aren't what's driving the UNH story right now, right? Or for a lot of other healthcare names for that matter, right? It's all about this Medicare for all rhetoric and how or if it gains traction going forward. So these are like the scenarios where I try to be more cautious and even though I think that there could be potential, right? Like you could still see some bigger moves. It's these are the scenarios where I try to you know pull back a little bit and say, okay, maybe I'll just wait until after and then try to jump in early, right? Instead of laying out the risk into the report, maybe wait until after the report and try to jump in really quick if something sets up. And again, you're going to find these types of scenarios over and over and over again, right? So it's just that right now it's Disney, UNH, and Boeing, but you'll start to see it. The more you look at these catalyst plays, it's these names that are being driven on something outside of earnings and revenues. You'll see it in biotechs or something like that. So those are the ones that I try to be a little bit more cautious on or avoid. Um, or if you want to play it, maybe something longer dated. Try to smooth out like the near term volatility, right? Um, but I just felt like it was a good time to talk about it. I spoke about it in the option sessions a couple times, and in the letters I've mentioned it. But I felt it was a good time to go over in the video just to kind of drive home the point that I was trying to make and just really highlight that for you guys. All right. So reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Questions, comments, just anything that comes to mind. Just shoot me a message, or you have my email. So I'd love to hear from you. All right. So have a great night, and I'll talk to you guys all tomorrow.